Thanks for joining. I'm Bobby Wilson. I'm CFO of Turnitin, and my colleague Elijah Mayfield is down here, and he'll be helping me present this in a few minutes. I'm going to kick it off with just a very, very quick overview of the company and show you where we are today, and then Elijah is going to take up the product discussion, and then I'll wrap things up at the end. So just very brief overview. We've been around for almost 2 decades now. We're the global leader in document authenticity, and we're headquartered in Oakland, California, and we've got 8 offices around the world. We're purely a SaaS business. We have been from the very beginning, and we stick to that very, very tightly. And we've recently introduced a new product called Revision Assistant, which we introduced last year, and it's what we're hoping to be a huge source of growth for the company in the coming years. Financial summary, we're 95+% SaaS today, and we expect that to continue, if not grow. We've been cash flow positive for a very, very long time, which is a nice thing for the finance guy. And we're looking at more than 100 million in ARR, and we've got a huge addressable market. So as I mentioned, we've been around for almost 2 decades. We've experienced quite a lot of growth over those 2 decades. We very recently, literally last week or the week before, we welcomed our 400th employee to the organization. We have a footprint of well over 15,000 institutions across the world, and we service more than 30 million students every year. So that's it for the quick overview, and I'll hand over to Elijah, and he will take you through a little bit of the product work.
So, a little over 2 years ago now, I had just joined the company from an acquisition they did of my startup, which came out of Carnegie Mellon. And as I joined, the company itself was about a year into their new ownership with Insight Venture Partners. And we came up with this slogan for what we wanted for 2020, which was around revolutionizing the experience of writing to learn. And that's a conversation that's been going on now for the entire time since early 2015 is, well, what does that really mean from the perspective of a company that's had a fairly narrow target around originality and plagiarism prevention? If you think about what it is that Turnitin did from 1998 through, call it 2010, really the entire story for the company was, what does it mean to be a plagiarism company? How do you detect unoriginal writing? How do you find students that need the help and that you can point them out to a place where you're going to either pull them out and put them into an academic misconduct setting or have some really negative consequences. And it produced this really problematic relationship between teachers, students, and Turnitin.com, where we were the police. We were the thing that was the negative relationship between the student and the university. And a big question that we had is, well, we being the company from several years ago, is where do you go from there? And how do you really change that relationship with students? And so they moved over the course of the next several years into being more of an assessment and feedback platform. More places for drag and drop comments for teachers to leave quick feedback for their students. More places for them to grade and use rubrics and track scores of student performance. And in recent years, the shift has really tried to move away from those end-of-course assessments, leaving feedback on term papers, and really doing the very sort of high-stakes writing in university settings into a much more formative platform that's really focused on improving student writing and changing the outcomes that we can see when it ties to how you write an essay, how you put papers into your course if you're an instructor, and what it means really to be a writing-focused company. This is not a small change for the company. It's actually a fairly monumental change in focus, because if you think about originality and plagiarism, you're really going to hit a ceiling at some point where you may be able to continue growing the business in terms of revenue, but you're going to really cap out on how much you're going to be able to change student outcomes and the role that Turnitin can have within an institution. So if you look at that original writing solution, the plagiarism component of Turnitin, that's really what's driven the business's growth for 2 decades. It's in use in 150 countries, and it tracks billions and billions of web pages, hundreds of millions of student essays that it's comparing against in a student paper database. And it's clearly the premier solution in this space. There's a small handful of companies that do this elsewhere, but the results really speak for themselves, and so there isn't really a competition here, which is a really healthy position for a company to be in terms of maintaining its stability over time. It's just sort of an unbreakable moat. But if you look at where we've moved since then, it's towards efficiency. It's towards saving teachers time by incorporating with that originality report the grade marks, we call them, which are comments that you can leave on student paper, voice comments, summary comments, and rubrics. And all of that is going to get you to a position where teachers like using Turnitin. They like being able to get their students' feedback quickly, and they like that it integrates into whatever platform that they're on, whether you're in Pakistan or in San Francisco or anywhere in between. And it's effective. The Feedback Studio product does bring down plagiarism cases within an institution. It saves time for teachers as they're grading, and it really alters student behaviors. My role, since I joined the company, has been to ask some broader questions around what is it that it means for Turnitin to be in an institution, and what do we think that we can do to affect change in student outcomes. Writing today in a modern university is very high stakes. In a modern high school, it is also often very high stakes. There are many places where students only experience writing in the context of an end-of-term paper, an 8-page assignment, something that's going to be worth 30% of their grade or something like that. And unsurprisingly, the result of this is that students believe sort of intrinsically that they're just not a good writer. They don't get a chance to practice. They don't get a chance to really think through what it means to just push out a page of thinking, to look at a set of sources and come up with a snap view of like, how could I present this information in an argument? It becomes a very intimidating thing, and I think to some extent Turnitin has actually made it more intimidating over the course of the 2 decades that we've been in existence. And that's a cultural impact in an education setting that we as a company now want to really reflect on and think about what it is that we can do to change that. So Revision Assistant is the product that we put out about 1.5 years ago now. And Revision Assistant is building off of the market success that Turnitin has had, and now is trying to think through, well, what can we do to really make a difference in the way that writing is assigned and the way that writing is incorporated into a curriculum. Turnitin is being used, with 500,000 or more submissions every single day. Those are overwhelmingly, like I said, these long-form term papers. What we want to do with Revision Assistant is make it possible for teachers to assign low-stakes writing throughout the school year, and make writing approachable, and make writing something that students feel empowered to do well. If you look on this image here, Revision Assistant automatically gives feedback to students as they're writing. This is the key difference between what you get out of any other writing platform. Everything as simple as like a Google Docs, all the way to a variety of other tools that help students structure or formulate their writing. With Revision Assistant, as a student is writing at any time, they can get feedback on their work. It can be automatically assessed across a trait-based rubric, and then it gives inline suggestions for where they should be spending more time structuring their argument, where they should be thinking about what it is that they need to do next, and also praising them for the places where they were really successful, making sure that they feel good about the role that they had in putting together this essay, in the strengths that they have as an author, and in the places where we really think that they should be, not only building off of their successes, but also potentially telling their peers or building up into small groups, here's the things that I'm doing and here's what I want to do next. This supports teachers in the classroom in a really powerful way. It means that you don't need to be sort of the proctor that's wandering around ensuring that students stay on task. That part's done for you. And the students stay engaged in the writing process throughout the class period and throughout their homework overnight and over the weekend, meaning that your time is then spent on deeper dive discussions with students that are further along in the writing process. It's working with students that are motivated and engaged in writing in response to an essay. And you can then really do the part that you enjoy about your work in many cases, which is trying to recognize those strengths and help students get over the hurdle where they're just not making further progress and say, I, as a teacher, am going to bring my to those areas. All of this is only really possible with machine learning and with artificial intelligence technologies that I developed along with a large number of people that I work with, first at Carnegie Mellon, then at our startup, and then most recently at Turnitin across the world. The problem here is that students just don't write enough without a tool like Revision Assistant. Students learn to write, we know, if they get more practice and they get high quality feedback on that practice. But the teachers just cannot do that. They can't be there for every assignment, for every draft of every student work. And so they resort to assigning fewer essays and making them more important. Every time you, as an instructor, give a group of 150 students an essay component to your course, you're signing yourself up for 20, 25 or more hours of grading afterward. Basically sacrificing an entire week's worth of evenings or a long weekend just applying through that single assignment. What we believe that we can do with Turnitin is scale the impact that teachers can have and really ensure that they know that the students are getting instant feedback on their writing. The students are continuing to progress in the writing process. The students are going through multiple drafts, thinking through where can I add more detail, what sources haven't I addressed yet, where should I be improving the quality of this work. They can get that feedback throughout the process instantaneously. This takes 2 or 3 seconds to evaluate and get back to them, so students can go through many drafts. And then the last bullet point here is the most interesting one to me because it was not obvious to me 2 or 3 years ago when I started working in depth on this problem with Turnitin. It felt intuitive to me that if students had access to this kind of feedback, teachers would jump all over it. What we found is that that's actually not the case unless you put in a lot more work. Because if you want to assign writing in a low-stakes, frequent fashion throughout your entire school year, that really fundamentally changes your curriculum. You no longer know what the sequencing is of assignments, like when do I do my work? When do I think through where an essay is going to go into this set of unit lesson plans? When are my students going to have time for this? When am I going to need to reserve the laptop cart? All of those things are tricky, and if you're a high school teacher and you're totally slammed, you're just not going to put the time into it. So even if this is something that can possibly make a difference, it's not going to be quite enough unless we hold your hand through to like the second or third step in the process. And so one of the things that we've worked on a lot in 2016, now into this year, is structuring Turnitin as a curriculum supplement on top of being a technology tool, walking through for teachers, what does your scope and look like from September through to May, or if you're in Australia, slightly different months, and say, you know, we are going to help you structure your school year so that you can assign writing every 2 weeks if you want to. And students can get low stakes practice all the time. Students don't need to be stressed out about writing. And by the time you do assign those term papers, the students will view this as a breeze, as something that's just not a concern. Similarly, at the end of the year, when you have your state assessments or when you have the ACT or SAT, students are going to go into that motivated and confident because they know already through repeated practice that they've got the basics down of how to compose an essay, they know how to revise, and they know how to look at sources and then build up an argument around it because they've already done it so many times. This is something that, you know, if you look at a multiple choice test, no one worries, does the student have the skills to fill in the multiple choice tests? It's just there, they figured it out. But with an essay, they absolutely do say, they literally just don't have the confidence that they can even complete the task, much less understand and do well on it. And we think that we can really change that culture in schools. The statistics on this are pretty strong. We're at well over 1 million essays now this school year in about 500 schools. And 94% of students that are writing in response to a revision assistant essay revised their essay at least once. They went to a second draft. Prior research in the literature suggests that about 1 in 4 students historically would do that otherwise. If you just give someone a word processor, 3 out of 4 high school students go to the top, they keep going until they hit the bottom, they save, they submit, and that's it. Now we see that more than 9 out of every 10 students are going through at least to a second draft before they submit to their teacher. The average in high school is 7 revisions. And so we're seeing students go through just numerous rounds of iteration writing entirely self-driven, entirely motivated by the fact that they're getting this feedback from the system. And our rubric, which is on a 4-point scale, shows that it's not just time spent on writing, it's also that they're actually improving the quality of that essay. So the students are going up almost a full score point from 2 out of 4 on average, which is less than proficient, to about 3 out of 4, which is actually proficiency. So this is a huge deal. This is something that we saw in 2015. That's where these numbers come from. I'm just pulling together now what the 2016-17 school year is going to look like, and we're there too as well there. So we're at a much larger scale now with hundreds of thousands of students across all of our districts. And it has continued to be effective even when we're not in that really hands-on relationship with every single one of our schools. So that's my goal and the goal of the company over the course of the next few years is continue to build off of the strength of the plagiarism tool where our originality algorithms are being used all over the world, building a really core foundation for the fundamental economics of the business. But encouraging students then with our new products to think through, Turnitin is not just my submission inbox. It's not just the place where I get feedback. It's actually now my coach where I understand how to become a better writer. And I understand that I can do this and that this is possible for me. It's not beyond my grasp. It's not that I am intuitively or sort of intrinsically a bad writer. It is that I haven't gotten enough practice, and with Turnitin I can, and I can get better. With teachers, I'd really love to push us from a place where Turnitin is a time-saving, because efficiency at the end of the day is the thing that almost every single company in this entire hotel is talking about. We, on the other hand, really need to take the fact that we're in every university, every high school, all over the world, and now say, we can do more with that, and we can really change the culture, scale the ability of teachers to get to all of their students, build their professional skills, and then improve their outcomes by actually making their entire curriculum look different, because these tools have actually changed the places where they can assign writing. And then for school leaders, again, if I'm looking as a superintendent or as a university provost, right now Turnitin's role in my organization is that it ensures academic integrity of my students. That's awesome, that's solid, it's a point solution. What we want to do now instead is say that with Turnitin, my students are improving in writing. They're actually becoming stronger writers. That, as second order effects, improves graduation rates, it drops dropout rates, it improves our test scores, it does all these other things. Like, that's the thing that is going to matter at the administrator level, but it only is possible once you get to the student and teacher level and really drive change there and encourage students to get that practice and use those tools to make it happen. Happy to talk about all the technology behind this, the curriculum impact that we've had in the last few years, but for now I'm going to hand off to Bobby for talk about the growth of the business.
All right, so that was a great overview of what our products do and how they work, and I'm going to take it more from the market perspective and tell you what we're going to do with all this. We've got amazing content assets, we've got incredible technology, and we have a footprint that is the envy of ed tech. So where are we going? If you looked at us 2 years ago, we existed solely in the summative space, helping students understand how well they wrote, past tense, and didn't have anything in the formative space. Looking forward to 2020, we're going to be in both the summative and the formative spaces, and we're also going to be outside of just higher ed and secondary ed. We're going to push down into primary education, and then we also see a huge opportunity for English language learners. This is a huge, huge global market, and it's ripe for disruption. It's something that's just not very well serviced today, and we think we can bring unique value to that market. So the drivers of growth, if you look at North America, we have a large footprint for our Feedback Studio product, many, many thousands of institutions. So our opportunity in North America is to take that footprint and cross-sell Revision Assistant into that customer base. We think it adds tremendous value, and it also is a very nice, tight value proposition with our existing product. In higher ed, we think we can take the work that's been done on Revision Assistant and create new value in areas like writing remediation or even further cementing our play in the integrity space. Those will get us deeper penetration into our clients and a greater share of wallet. And then there's also an opportunity, as I mentioned, to build a version of Revision Assistant for younger learners, learners that are writing at the sentence level or at the paragraph level but aren't quite at essays yet. And that allows us to expand into a new market that we don't really serve today. In international, it's slightly different. We've still got a lot of market to go get with our core integrity product, with Feedback Studio. There are really large markets out there, and share isn't owned by anyone yet, and we're in prime position to go capture it. We also have the opportunity to sell Revision Assistant into the Anglosphere without serious modification. There's a little bit of content work to do, but other than that, the product's generally in pretty good shape to go there, and that allows us to expand our footprint in secondary education outside of the United States. And last but not least, I mentioned the needs of the English language learners. This is a poorly served market today. A lot of it's done with labor, putting students into classrooms with lots and lots of other students and just throwing teachers at it. We feel like we can bring a very unique solution to this market. It's a huge market, and as it says here, it's ripe for disruption. So in summary, this is my last slide. We have a footprint that is fantastic. We have differentiated products. We have a large sales channel. We've got terrific and scalable infrastructure, and the content is second to none in many respects. So we see a huge market opportunity, and we want to take that and continue our very long streak of 20% growth per year and steadily expanding margins. And that's what we intend to do for the next several years. So we'll take any questions for the next 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Yep.
Are you considering attending other languages aside from English?
So first, there's a microphone that'll be floating around all over the place. For that question, I will repeat it, but future people should check out the microphone. The question was, are we looking at languages outside of English? The core originality product currently works in 22 different languages and is all over the place. With Revision Assistant, because of the machine learning that it relies on, that's a much harder lift. So there are some languages, like the Romance languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French, where it's doable, and we see clear pathways there. It's not on our priority list the next year or two, but we could pretty easily get there. There are other languages linguistically that are harder. So like Turkish is very challenging, for instance. Arabic is very challenging. So some are just off limits. But there are clear pathways where we can do something there. I don't expect it in 2017, and realistically not 2018 either.
It's worth noting that our core Feedback Studio solution works in 19 different languages today, right? So
19.
We tick the box on that solution, but as Elijah mentioned, Revision Assistant is going to take some more work.
I have a question. So, and I'm sorry, I missed the first 5 or 10 minutes, so you might have touched on this, but have you explored, or are you exploring using machine learning or artificial intelligence to sort of, interpret student writing, and do you see a role for that, or is it too blue sky?
The whole thing's machine learning. Or wait, what do you mean by interpret?
Instead of using rubrics and so forth, to have instructors sort of interpret student writing using rubrics. Because when I used Turnitin like a couple of years ago, that's what it was, but there was no way to have give scores and so forth based on sort of AI algorithms. But is that not the case? So apologies if that was a dumb question.
I totally agree. Like that is really awesome, and we are indeed building that. So Revision Assistant aims at that in the high school market, and then we're going to expand from there. And it's definitely, if you've used it a couple of years ago, things have expanded since then for sure.
But yes, very heavy use of machine learning in the Revision Assistant product, and that's going to be pushed into the Feedback Studio product in the coming months and years. 8 seconds, quick.